Anna had spent 5 years searching for a legend, a wolf no one could tame. They called him the Ghost of the North. A shadow in the snow, a beast that vanished before human eyes could catch him. No traps worked, no cameras ever captured him. Locals whispered about his golden eyes. Eyes that had stared into the souls of those lucky enough to survive an encounter. No one had ever tamed him. No one had ever touched him. And then one night, he came to her. Anna had spent weeks in the freezing cold, tracking him. She had seen glimpses, a shadow moving through the trees, a flash of gold between the branches, deep paw prints vanishing into the endless white, but she had never seen him until that night. The wind howled through the trees as she trudged through the deep snow, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her camera was slung over her shoulder, her hands numb from the cold. Then, she saw it. A dark stain in the snow. Blood. Her pulse quickened. She followed the crimson trail, her heart pounding louder with every step. And then, there he was. Collapsed. Motionless. A massive black wolf, his thick fur matted with blood, deep claw marks running down his side. His ribs rose and fell in weak, uneven breaths. Anna's body froze. Was this real? Was she really standing inches away from the legend? Then, his golden eyes opened. He didn't snarl, didn't move. He just stared at her. A silent challenge, a silent plea. Anna had spent her entire career studying wild wolves. She knew better than to interfere. She knew the rules. But in that moment, she broke them. Slowly, she knelt beside him. "I won't hurt you," she whispered. The wolf didn't react. Anna reached out, hands shaking, and pressed her palm against his side. Warmth. Life. And in that instant, she made a decision. She was going to save him. Dragging a 150-pound wolf through the snow was impossible. But Anna wasn't giving up. She wrapped her coat around him, pressing her hands against his wounds to stop the bleeding. Every time she moved, he let out a low, rumbling growl. But he didn't bite. That gave her hope. Hour after hour, she worked. She cleaned his wounds, stitched the worst cuts, wrapped his body in blankets. She barely slept, but neither did he. They watched each other. Two souls who weren't supposed to cross paths, but somehow they had. The next morning, Anna expected him to be gone, but he stayed. Weak but watchful, cautious but calm. She left food for him, raw meat, fresh water. At first he didn't touch it, but then, one night, she woke up to soft crunching sounds. She peered out from her cabin window and saw him eating. Her heart pounded. He was choosing to trust her. Days turned to weeks. The wolf, who she named Kyle, slowly grew stronger. At first, he stayed near the edge of the woods, always watching her, always keeping his distance. But then, one night, she sat by the fire, lost in thought, and he took his first step toward her. She didn't move, didn't breathe, then another step, and another, until he was right beside her. Her hand trembled as she reached out. And this time, he didn't pull away. He let her touch him. And in that moment, something shifted. Kel wasn't just a wolf anymore. He was something more. By the third week, Kyle walked beside her. When she went into the forest, he followed. When she sat by the river, he lay beside her. Every night, he howled beneath her window, a deep, haunting sound that sent chills down her spine. Not a cry for a mate, not a call for a pack. A sound meant only for her. Anna had always been alone, but now she wasn't. They had found each other. But fate had other plans. One morning, Anna collapsed, a sharp pain in her chest, a weakness in her bones. She thought it was exhaustion, maybe stress. But the truth was far worse. The doctors were blunt. Stage 4 cancer. She had months, not years, not time to finish her work. Just months. Her first thought wasn't about herself. It was about Cale. Who would watch over him? Who would he howl for? She had no choice. She had to leave the wilderness. She packed her things. When she stepped into the car, Cale ran beside it, howling. When she drove away, his golden eyes never left hers. She had saved his life. But now she had to leave him behind. Months passed. The city became her new home. The hospital became her prison. She thought she'd never see Kyle again. Until one night, the howling began. Soft at first, then louder. The nurses thought she was imagining it. But every night, the sound returned. Through the hospital walls, through the noise of the city, a howl that reached her even in her weakest moments. Then, one night, the doctors came running. Her monitors were beeping wildly. Her body was shutting down. But she wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. Because outside her window stood a golden-eyed shadow. Kyle. Through miles of wilderness, through streets and crowds, he had followed her scent. But when they checked outside, there were no tracks in the snow. The nurses told her it was impossible, that it was just in her head. But she knew better. Then, one night, the howling stopped. And Anna understood. Cale wasn't coming anymore, because he had been waiting for her. And now, it was time to go. With one last breath, she closed her eyes. And somewhere, in the heart of the wild, a wolf's final howl echoed through the night. The end.